This video is now in session, and Pennsylvania, in their Senate race for 2022, has just added a new candidate that would bring a major shift to one of the primaries. And his name is Conor Lamb, who is currently the representative of Pennsylvania's 17th congressional district. So with that, we have four major candidates in the Democratic primary and four major candidates in the Republican primary, all vying to succeed Pat Toomey, who is the current incumbent U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania. And he won in 2016 with 48.8% of the vote. But he represents more of the Bush style of politics. He represents more of the moderate style of politics in the Republican Party. And with the Republicans moving away from that kind of policy angle, as a result, we're seeing Pat Toomey retire from the U.S. Senate, choosing to not run for another term. So with that, it is an open race between 8 candidates in the Republican and Democratic primary. So we're going to go over the Democratic primary first, and then we're going to go over the Republican primary before connecting both of them together into the general election to see who would be the most likely candidate to succeed Pat Toomey as Senator from Pennsylvania. So on the Democratic side, we have 4 candidates. The first candidate, Val Arkush, represents the female wing of the Democratic primary, and these days, females usually vote more than males in Democratic primaries, so that gives her a reasonable position in the primary. She represents the female wing. She also represents the academic wing of the Democratic primary. She has the endorsement of the 314 Action Committee and Emily's List. Both of them are political action committees. So with that, she represents more of Philadelphia politics, and you'll see here that 2 of these members represent Philadelphia politics, while 2 other members represent Pittsburgh politics. So the second candidate is Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, who represented, who was the mayor of Braddock, which is near Pittsburgh, before he became the Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, serving with Tom Wolf, who is currently the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania. And John Fetterman, he represents the progressive side of the Democratic Party, but more importantly, for this specific election, he represents the populist wing of the Democratic Party, because John Fetterman has been shown to inspire Pennsylvanian voters statewide, and that is partially why he got elected into the lieutenant governor position. So John Fetterman currently, as a result, is the frontrunner of the Democratic primary. And then next we have State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, who comes from the Philadelphia area. He also represents the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, but he isn't really the populist wing of the Democratic Party. That said, there's one major, difference between John Fetterman and Malcolm Kenyatta as progressives, which relates, or 2 differences: fracking and as well as racial issues. When it comes to fracking, John Fetterman supports fracking, or at least as of now, while Malcolm Kenyatta does not. Another thing is that John Fetterman had an incident as mayor of Braddock in 2013, in which he racially profiled a Black American in Braddock for another Black American who was involved in a shooting at Braddock. So with that, he racially profiled him, and he received a lot of backlash for it, and to this day, he's still receiving backlash. Malcolm Kenyatta, meanwhile, does not have any of those incidents. He does not have any of those political baggages to handle, which makes him a clean-cut progressive. Next, and finally, we have Conor Lamb, who entered this race just a few days ago. He represents the moderate wing of the Democratic primary, which up until now, surprisingly, there has not really been any moderate in the Democratic primary that has really stuck out. But Conor Lamb is the first candidate to stick out in this primary. So Conor Lamb is the representative from a district that encompasses suburban Pittsburgh. And suburban Pittsburgh is it's leaning more towards the conservative side. If we look at the 17th district and the Cook Political Report rating, it is R+2, and it surrounds Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, and then it goes all the way to the western side of Pennsylvania. Conor Lamb won this seat by 3% in 2019 in that special election, or at least in 2020 when it comes to the 2018 election. When it comes to the 2018 election, Conor Lamb was able to win with a pretty big margin. But when it came to 2020, he won by way less of a large margin. So as a result, he represents moderate politics, and those are the four sides to the Democratic primary. When it comes to the Republican primary, there's not really as big of a diverse opinion across the board. The four major candidates, Kathy Barnett, Jeff Bartos, Sean Parnell, and as well as Carla Sands, they all are trying to get the Trump vote, because whoever gets the Trump vote means that they will most likely win the Republican primary. Trump is still very influential in Pennsylvania, even though he lost that state in 2020, but the Republican base in Pennsylvania is still very heavily favored towards Trump, especially in Pennsylvania because he won the state in 2016 and because he is a populist, which for Pennsylvania politics is pretty favorable if you are a populist. So Kathy Barnett, Jeff Bartos, and Sean Parnell, they've all bruised each other before Carla Sands came onto the stage, and they both criticized each other for being too moderate. And then they all three of them said that they represent the Trump wing, that they are the Trumpiest candidate in the Republican primary. That was before Carla Sands came on to the Republican primary. She was the ambassador to Denmark and worked for Donald Trump, which gives her a very big credibility boost among these four candidates. And at this point, Carla Sands could very well be considered the frontrunner of this race because of her credentials as working under Donald Trump. And then if we were to rate a runner-up, that would be Sean Parnell, who is the second most well-known Republican in this list for the Republican primary. He won the Republican primary for Conor Lamb's seat, the 17th congressional district, but he lost against Conor Lamb by 3 points in 2020, 51% to 48%. So those are the four Republicans of the Republican primary and the four candidates for the Democratic primary. When it comes to the general election, this is a seat that, even though a quick political report rates this seat as a toss-up, we would rate it as a tilt to lean seat in favor of the Democrats. And that's because Joe Biden won the state in 2020, and it's also because the Republicans haven't really done super well in Pennsylvania as of late. And when it comes to 2016, yes, Donald Trump won that election, but when it comes to Senate races, it seems like that only a few Republicans have been able to stand out and won Republican Senate races, that being Pat Toomey and as well as Rick Santorum. Besides those two candidates plus Donald Trump, it seems like there really hasn't been any other Republican that has struck out in Pennsylvania politics, and at this point, we don't really see any Republicans striking out as of now. Meanwhile, for the Democratic side, we see two prominent Democrats who have run for pretty competitive races before, that being John Fetterman and as well as Conor Lamb. This is also, by the way, not an endorsement of any candidate, but rather an analytical side to these elections. So right now, John Fetterman seems like he's most likely going to win the general election. It's obviously too early to definitively say, since there's more than a year out before the general election happens. But John Fetterman is a populist, and as of now, he's really the only populist candidate of the Pennsylvania Senate race. When it comes to all three of these 8 candidates combined, none of them are really populist candidates, with the exception of John Fetterman, and that really appeals to Pennsylvanian voters. A lot of Pennsylvanians want a populist candidate, and these days, when it comes to Pennsylvania politics, if you are a populist, not only can you get your core Democratic or Republican base, but you can also get the rural base of Pennsylvania Pennsylvania, which is actually a pretty competitive base when it comes to Pennsylvania. They voted for Obama in 2008, but for Donald Trump in 2016. And if John Fetterman does become the Democratic candidate for the Pennsylvania Senate, he could very well win those rural votes because he has shown that he has been able to win those votes as Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, along with Tom Wolf, who is the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania. And he has also shown that he brings populism into the Pennsylvania election. In an election where Donald Trump won in 2016 and Pat Toomey won in 2016, we saw how John Fetterman was able to win in 2018 as lieutenant governor. So, though John Fetterman, as of now, still is the most likely contender for this race, in terms of Conor Lamb, he does bring a good challenge to John Fetterman, but at this point, it seems like Conor Lamb represents more of the establishment Democratic Party, which in Pennsylvania is becoming less favorable for Democrats. These days, a lot of Pennsylvanians, especially in rural areas, are becoming more averse to the Democratic Party as a whole. When we see polls right here, Conor Lamb is the only Democrat out of these four pollsters that lose to a Republican, and he loses to Sean Parnell, who he won against in the 17th congressional district, which indicates that Conor Lamb is not quite ready for the Senate race, especially in comparison to John Fetterman, who wins by 8% in this poll right here and by 12% in this poll right there. Now, we will say that this poll was sponsored by Fetterman's campaign, which indicates that Conor Lamb would get less favorable numbers than John Fetterman, but nonetheless, it's more likely that John Fetterman has the money and the resources to win the Pennsylvania Senate races, while Conor Lamb does not have as much resources as John Fetterman, even though he represents the moderate side of the Pennsylvania primary. Now, in terms of the Senate election, it is incredibly competitive because of context. If we look at the context, Democrats have a 50-50 split in the United States Senate, and their most vulnerable seat as of now is New Hampshire. If New Hampshire goes for the Republican Party, then Democrats need a race where they can pick up from the Republicans, and that would most likely be from Pennsylvania, which is why this seat is so competitive, especially because Pat Toomey, the incumbent senator, is not running for re-election. But this is in stark contrast to the Pennsylvania governor's race. If we look at the 2022 governor's races in Pennsylvania, there is no incumbent because Tom Wolf, the incumbent governor, is term limited. But as of now, we're actually not seeing as much competitiveness when it comes to the Republican and Democratic side, which is very confusing because this race is also pretty competitive. It can determine whether Republicans have a trifecta in the state government or whether there will be a divided government to continue for another 4 years. In fact, actually, for the Democratic primary, there hasn't actually been any candidates that have declared to run. The only exception is Josh Shapiro, who at this point seems likely to become the Democratic primary leader. But this is a race that Conor Lamb very well could have won if he ran for this seat instead of Pennsylvania Senate seat, and he could run in conjunction with John Fetterman in the general election if they wanted to represent the Democratic sides against the Republican opponents. But instead, John Fetterman, or I guess Conor Lamb, is going head-on with John Fetterman in the Democratic primary. And it's not completely Conor Lamb's fault. Redistricting is supposed to happen in Pennsylvania, and Conor Lamb's seat could very well be sacked in favor of making it more Republican, in favor of making it much more conservative than it currently is. And with that, Conor Lamb only has a 3% margin to lose. If he loses that 3%, then he is likely not to win in 2022, which is why he's already jumping on board for a statewide race. But he could have run for lieutenant governor or for governor, and he would have had a much easier time than running for senator. Meanwhile, the Republican primary for the Pennsylvania governor's race is not actually that it's not that big as of now. The biggest candidate is Lou Barletta, who currently, or not currently, but used to represent Pennsylvania's 11th congressional district before it was redistricted. But we don't really see that many major members in the Pennsylvania gubernatorial election, which makes this a great seat for anyone in the Senate election trying to get a statewide race. They could shift over to this race and they would have a much easier time. But nonetheless, that politics just works how it is. Some people want to run for the Senate instead of a governor's race because a governor manages a state and a senator manages national politics. So that's the race as of now for the 2022 Pennsylvania Senate race. It's turning out to be more competitive than we ever thought, but that might just be a good thing for both the Democrats and the Republicans come 2022. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.